thanks everyone for coming out tonight. I know there are a lot of other things going on in Juneau tonight, so I appreciate you coming out. Like Mary Lou said, I'm going to do a couple different things tonight. I'm working on a long-term project out in Adak, out in the Aleutians, which is, I'm sure we all know this, but about halfway out the chain here. We'll talk a little bit about Adak here in a moment, and I'm going to switch gears a little bit later and talk about something that I've been working on off and on for quite a while here in Juneau, and then a little bit about the Alaska Positive exhibition that Mary Lou talked about, which again is closing on Saturday, and then we'll wrap it up and have some questions. Okay?
And then, I'm so sorry, I forgot to tell you that this is being taped tonight by KTOO, so it will be presented. So please, quickly give your cell phones out and turn them off, mute them. Sorry.
Thank you, Mary Lou. So just a couple minutes about Adak, right? So this is, like Mary Lou said, the third in this series of lectures. We heard Brian and Ash Adams here 2 months ago. We had Chris Miller here last month, and then I'm wrapping it up. We had Larry McNeil, the juror of Alaska Positive, started off here 3 months ago. And each one of these photographers sort of had places that they were drawn to, right? Places that they've devoted time and resources and talents to. Chris being the fisheries in Southeast and out in Bristol and the Bering and Point South. Brian and Ash being primarily, with the work that they showed anyway, the northwest coast of the state. Sort of working in projects, sort of project-based, long-term, years in the making and sometimes projects. And I'm sort of that camp as well. Things that sort of strike my interest, things that I'm drawn to, things that I question, things that I want to know more about, things that make me uncomfortable are usually the things that I'm sort of drawn to photographically. I had a body of work that was published as a book a couple years ago called The Last Road North that was about sort of focused on the stretch of road, 500 miles of mostly dirt road from Fairbanks to Prudhoe Bay. And it was during that time when I was living in Fairbanks in about 2007 that I picked up a book by Cohen, The Forgotten War. It's actually a 3-volume set, this large sort of paperback set about World War II and about the campaign out in the Aleutians. And flipping through that book and seeing Attu and Kiska, right, and the history of the Japanese occupying those islands during World War II and the bombing of Dutch Harbor, and sort of the more contemporary sort of theater that was Adak, right, that was occupied, but we went in 42 and we laid down an airport, and it was initially the Army and then the Air Force, and then during the Cold War, the Navy. And going in and seeing some of these pictures of this place that was out in the middle of, you know, the Bering Sea to the north, Pacific Ocean to the south, way out the chain, upwards of 6,000 people, servicemen and support and women and families, service women and families, living on the island during the time. And then to come to find out that Wikipedia would tell you there's 230 people there on the last census, right? Then to find out that actually there's right in the 78 people on that island currently living within the infrastructure that accommodated a force of 6,000 people, right? And this idea of this place that was so vital and so important, and that we but we devoted so much money to and so much treasure to and so much focus to, and it was really important until the day that it wasn't, right? And in 97, everyone on the island, they shipped everybody off the island. It became now not a place that was warded off for the military. Anyone can go. Alaska Airlines flies twice a week, and we'll talk about that as we look at the pictures. But I was interested in, as I was with the Haul Road work, interested in this place that was sort of suited for the end of the roaders, right? Sort of suited for this hard scrabble group of people that have chosen to live in this place that on the surface, really no one has any business living there from an economic standpoint, from a sense standpoint, right? But it is this beautiful, unique place. So I was talking about going there for a lot of years. Jackie and I were just talking a moment ago. I had a solo exhibition of the Last Road North pictures at the Old Museum, And even then I was talking about, one day I'm gonna go to ADAC, what's the next thing? The next thing's ADAC, and I kind of got to this point where I knew subconsciously that I was turning into that guy that was always gonna talk about doing something and never actually do it. And then July of 2015, I made the first trip out to the island. So the pictures that we're gonna look at now are actually over 3 trips, July of 2015, of March of this last year, and then September of this last year. Oh, sorry. So this is ADAC, sort of ADAC proper. This is abandoned military housing, mostly family housing. I'm standing here on the top of what they call Water Tower Hill, which is the water tower, the water source for the town. There's 4 different, there's other accommodations or other old housing up on the hill, up on Bering Hill, where all the military outposts were. But down in town, there are 4 separate housing sort of neighborhoods. All of the pastel color buildings here are all the Culloch neighborhood. Behind us here is Culloch Bay, and then on the other side of Landfill Hill, which is the one that's sort of eroding sides there, Sweeper Bay is behind that, which is where the harbor is, which we'll look at here in a few slides. So we have Culloch neighborhood. The yellow 2-story buildings in the distance are the Bayview neighborhood. We have a couple pictures of Sandy Cove neighborhood here as well shortly. But all of these units, all of these duplexes are abandoned, right? They all housed military families up till 1997, and now are there sort of succumbing to the elements. Right in the middle of the frame there's the yellow and the green duplex, and then there's one off to the right, just the second from the right there in the middle. It's really hard to see, but there's one little smokestack that has a blue tarp wrapped around it, and a bucket on the top to keep water from going in. And that one unit is inhabited during the summer by a gentleman by the name of Larry, who we're going to see a picture of here in a moment. But a picture from March of the town. This is the harbor. A wind event last December. Actually, this tug, there's actually another tug tied to it that's sitting directly beneath it on the bottom of the harbor there. This is obviously just inside the seawall, and then there's 5 bays off to our right. But they're tied together, and in high winds this last December, the one that's underwater started listing and taking on water and rolled and took the other one with it. And it's been sitting there, and there's no, I guess once you get the fuel off, there's no great reason to go in and to reclaim it or to try to move it somewhere else, right? It sort of becomes a casualty of the landscape, just like most everything else in ADAC. One of the warehouses actually just off from where that tug was, a fire took. These are fire breaks, concrete walls, sort of 100 yards, probably 100 yards in staggering, and probably a 500-yard long building. And the fire took all of the building except for those middle concrete walls. So this is sort of a looking out, looking in picture of that building. Navy issue vehicle in Sandy Cove. So everyone that lives there now lives in these buildings, or these old duplexes, right? Whether they're in Culloch or whether they're in Bayview or whether they're in Sandy Cove. I rent, it's not this building, but the city clerk, a woman by the name of Deborah, lives in one and rents the other, and I rent from her when I go. And this is right down the street from her neighborhood, so this is a van that's been around since the 80s or the 90s. Things go to the island, but I mean, like most places in Alaska off the road system, things go to the island or go to the village, and they don't leave, right? They suffer a death there, and they stay there. A gentleman by the name of Jordan. Another picture of Bayview. Right off Culloch Bay, Bering Sea to the north, right? So a tiny piece of siding curls up and the wind, shears off the side, right? And there's wind and rain, 120-mile sustained winds there this last December, which is part of the storm that turned that tug. and once you sort of expose these sides, right, you have rain damage, wind damage. There's nothing there that's being salvaged. You talk to folks, and there's sort of stories of when they first moved in the mid-90s of before things really started going south, and you wanted to do some remodeling, or you're in your unit and your dishwasher went out. Well, you walked down the street and pilfered a dishwasher from a building that no one was in. And obviously now they're well past that. But as a photographer, this is sort of the kind of photographer like me, I guess me personally, these are the kind of things I stay up at night thinking about, right? This sort of the built environment, these breathtaking, almost heartbreaking landscapes, and this sort of push and pull and sort of this nexus of the things that we've made and the things that were here that we're not responsible for, right? How we're using the landscape, how we're maybe exploiting the landscape, not knowing entirely what I was going to find in ADAC. I mean, knowing a little bit, right? Going to blogs. We'll talk about caribou here in a minute, but a lot of people that maybe go out hunting and blogs that people have put information and maybe some pictures, sort of travel journals and whatnot, and seeing just enough to sort of recognize that this was a place that was interesting to me from a visual standpoint, but then also sort of from a sociological standpoint, from a political standpoint. It's hard to sort of ignore the decay of a lot of these things and the wastefulness of a lot of these things and sort of the power beneath it. But at the end of the day, it's fascinating to me. Yeah, so they're actually, what they are is the bottom windows open, right? And those are just to keep wind off of those bottom windows, right? So when the wind goes here, you know, you're walking around and there's siding blowing around. You can almost get cut in half by detritus blowing all over the place. But in most of these units, and some of the units in Sandy Cove as well, those bottom windows open, and they're just, I think, to keep the wind blows so much, right? So you don't have wind blowing directly into those open windows. A portrait of Sharon. So 78 people on the island, right? Not a lot of economy there. There's a little bit of fishing. When I was there in July, there were 3 halibut boats that were operating. When I was back again in March, it was down to 2, and we'll talk about that in a second here as well. There are birders that come through ADAC when there's sort of winds, easterly winds come and push birds from Asia over to ADAC that typically don't come. A lot of birders come to see birds that maybe they wouldn't see otherwise. There's a caribou population on the island, and 200 caribou were introduced during World War II as sort of a sporting resource, but then also sort of an emergency resource, that if something happened that transportation was cut off, that there'd be some sort of food source there. So there are people, a lot of people from Southeast actually go sort of make that migration to ADAC to hunt caribou. But there's obviously still an operating school. There was once a high school, and then across the street an elementary school and a middle school, and now all of that's combined into one building that houses all of the schools and city government and mail and all of that. But this is Sharon. Sharon was a junior in high school when I made this picture in July of 2015. She was one of 2 people in her class. When I went back last time, she had graduated early and was in Washington State attending community college. Culloch Bay across to Great Sitkin Island and Great Sitkin Sound, facing northeast. Eli. It seems to me, it feels, maybe because you see them more than adults a lot of the time. It's sort of a strange place in that it seems like the adults spend a great deal of time indoors, and of course the kids are running around everywhere. This is Eli. The beach is just off, kind of downslope from him, and they were sledding on this new snow down to the beach there at Culloch Bay. The thing that sort of struck me the first time I went to Adak, that first night, right? So I landed in the evening in July, and it rained the entire week, just gray, just heavy. I don't even heavy. It was a heavy feeling, but it was just sort of this drizzle rain all day for a week. But the kids are sort of everywhere, right? Kids run around like they do. But the thing that's interesting about walking around sort of the buildings and the neighborhoods here was everything felt so safe, right? Which as a photographer, it's sort of a difficult thing to try to work out visually, right? Like it felt to me like places that I knew in the Midwest, right? And you sort of come to realize that it's military housing, it's military construction, military design. It's meant to feel safe. It's meant to feel familiar. It's meant to feel like anywhere USA. It could be, just outside of Omaha, Nebraska, right? The street lamps don't work. Most of them are broken out. You sort of walk around and you sort of get lulled into this sort of feeling of safety and familiarity. I grew up during the Cold War and sort of grew up during, films like Red Dawn, right, and Rocky IV and duck and cover drills, right? Like the Cold War was this thing, right? The Red Guard was this thing, and Adak holds, I don't know, a lot of not memory, but sort of a strange sort of nostalgia in that way. And the kids feel like sort of, to me, of that time. As a photographer, I think you're always, at least I'm always sort of battling with this idea of sort of fact and fiction and construction. What's the story that I'm trying to tell, and knowing that the pictures that I make can only really go halfway, right? That the viewer halfway across that void picks it up, and the viewer is what, the viewer finishes that picture, right? The viewer puts onto that picture their own history and bias and baggage or memory or whatever it is, right? Like the viewer is what finishes it off, and I'm always sort of looking to mess things up a little bit, right? To try to get to the point and try to make something that I think says what I want it to say, and then sort of back off a little bit. This picture of this guy Shan. I used to talk about this when I taught classes, right? That a lot of time with portraiture, the thing that I'm sort of looking for is when you approach somebody, you say, "I'd really like to take your picture," right? That conversation, that initial reaction changes your relationship, right? You have a camera, they're going to be on the other side of it. It's something that I'm always trying to sort of negotiate back to that point that I stopped for whatever reason, that thing that I loved about them, the light or the look that they had or what they're wearing, whatever it is, trying to negotiate myself back to that point of what I first saw, right? Because as soon as you sort of introduce yourself and you say, I have the camera and I'm making a picture and blah, 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 you've kind of killed that moment, right? And a lot of the time with portraits, what I'm sort of dealing with is gesture, right? Shan was a sort of nervous guy that was always sort of at his beard, and I found that interesting, right? Like this sort of whatever it was compelling visually to me, right? And sort of working backwards to try to find that thing again. Typically, the longer projects that I've worked on, and the one that I'm going to show at the end, I've worked with a large format film camera, right? You see pictures like Ansel Adams with the bellows and the hood and on the tripod, and it's very slow and it's very methodical, and you can sort of almost wear down the person on the other end. Then a lot of time I sort of be under the cloth, just sort of waiting for them to sort of drop their guard and get to that point where they were not as aware of me, right? That they weren't putting on the smile, that they weren't trying to be anything that they weren't. They would just sort of settle and be the person that I saw them initially. And this work is all digital. This work I intended to do with the 4x5, and then just prior to going on this trip, sort of the wind and the rain and the elements, I'm a little, at the time I was a little ashamed to say sort of I chickened out a little bit, right? I thought, man, I don't know if I can pull the pictures off that I really want to pull off in those elements with the big camera. But even with the digital camera, still for the most part dealing with the tripod, trying to slow that process down, trying to make the same type of pictures I was making with the bigger camera, with the plate camera. This is sort of in that vein. A picture that I probably couldn't have gotten with the plate camera. One, because I probably just wouldn't have burned the film that I did with this, right? With the film, with the 4x5, you know, I'd devote maybe 2 frames to something and then go on to something else. But this particular picture, the first time that I went out in July, I didn't rent a vehicle. I thought, you know, for a week, I'm just gonna walk, right? I'm just gonna be that guy in town that's walking around with his camera and meet people and not drive by things and sort of wonder what was there. Just walk and put in some miles and just get it done. And this is at Finger Bay, which is several miles south of town. And I was standing there sort of looking at this building, and this eagle had been sort of circling around as I was walking in, and it sat on the peak of that roof, and it sat there for a second, and I knew that if I walked toward it, eventually I was going to get close enough that I was going to spook it, and it was going to take off. I had the tripod. I'm sort of walking, and I'd walk a little bit, and I'd sit and I'd walk a little bit, and sit. And I'm not a nature photographer. It's not sort of my strong suit. But I thought this guy is he's sort of beautiful, obviously. And I took a couple pictures. Actually, I probably took 5 or 6 frames. And I look, you know, I have the digital camera, so I'm looking on the back, and each one of them, they're just not quite right. Like, they just didn't have the wingspan that I wanted. It just wasn't, you know, like, all right, fine, it's not going to work. And I started to walk away, and I turned, and he was sitting right back again on the peak of the roof, just sort of looking at me like, I'll give you one more shot. Like you're amateur, like, I'll give you one more go. And I got sort of what I was hoping to maybe get the first time. This is Larry, who we mentioned at the very beginning, where we saw his house from on top of Water Tower Hill in March. I met him in July. He was out driving around. There's 3 different salmon runs that go pretty much right through town. And at that time, the silvers were running pretty hard, and he was actually sort of back and forth between a sockeye run and a silver run with his dog Sancho here. And he's from Texas. Him and his wife came up a couple years ago to go caribou hunting. And the way he says it, he came up to get a caribou and didn't get any caribou, but left with a house in Adak. And they bought this duplex, and him and his wife come up in the summer just to fish, and he's retired just to fish and to drive around with the dog, and sort of play around in the old abandoned buildings, and look at the light, and just sort of enjoy the place in retirement. And in talking to him, I saw him a lot that week that I was there in March. He bought the duplex for $18,000. His fuel bill per month is just about $900. And he bought it, he stays there in the summer, and when he leaves at the end of the summer, he takes everything with him the things that he leaves behind in the unit are things that he can do without, right? That him and his wife bought this thing knowing that one day they just have to walk away from it, right? I mean, it's not going to appreciate, it's not something they're going to resell. A lot of the talk on the island is about Alaska Airlines, right? They fly twice a week. It's the only way you can get in and out unless you're on a fishing boat, which we'll talk about here as well. But you know, Alaska Airlines stops flying to Adak. Adak sort of buckles in on itself. He sort of bought this place knowing that one day he'd probably have to walk away. Jeremy has a yard that is the envy of the Culloch Bay neighborhood. Here he's jumping his riding lawnmower in September to do the last mowing of the year. His mom, Kat, Aleut Elder. All the units are painted. This one's seen so much sand come off of, from the wind, come off the beach there that it sort of sandblasted the side of that building, and it's all just sort of shiny aluminum now in the sunrise. Where everything is sort of falling apart, sort of going back to where it came, if you will. Adam is one of a few people on the island that are sort of turning things around a bit. There's a processing plant, a cannery there that at one point employed 200 or so people. And most of it's inoperable now, but there's an outfit out of Washington that is bringing on a crew of like 20 or so people, and they're doing some crab processing there, and we'll do some halibut processing there during the season. And Adam works for the owner out of Washington, and they're repairing some walls that have some really significant water damage on this one street that they're calling Cannery Row, where they're housing all the employees, all the people that are there to work at the cannery. Another view back toward Landfill Hill. These houses, I don't know if anybody in the room knows the work of Robert Adams. Robert Adams is probably arguably sort of the best landscape photographer of the day right now. A few generations older than I am, probably close to 75 maybe now. He spent most of his career working on the Front Range of Colorado, a lot of time in Colorado Springs specifically, dealing with suburbs and sort of dealing with urban sprawl and light. And a lot of his work, and my work is not Robert Adams' work, but a lot of the work and the time that he spent in those neighborhoods, when I'm there, and this particular morning, sunrise was coming up, and it was literally running around with the tripod like a crazy person, laughing out loud, just like running and taking a picture, and then running over here and taking a picture in the sunrise, probably 20 minutes of just some of the most glorious light I've ever stood beneath. And I sort of joke, and there's so much going on the island. We're gonna look at some of the military stuff here in a minute, but as a photographer, if I'm sort of being really honest with myself and not sort of thinking about this end story and eventual book, I'd be really happy in my old age just hanging out in this one neighborhood, just watching the light, making pictures of these houses like every day for forever, and I have hundreds of them. In the houses, I stumbled onto this last trip an old telephone book, and it's funny because there's an R. Adams there at the time. An old telephone book from like the late 80s, early 90s. And one of the things that I sort of struggle with in thinking about this work and being a book, which it will eventually be, sort of dealing with this idea of past and present, this contemporary look of this place in color and beautiful light and of interesting characters and all of these things, but then also to sort of point to the things in the past, right? And you have things that are old and rusty and windblown and falling apart. I mean, that points to the past. But one of the things that is sort of, not an issue, but one of the things that I sort of have battled with a little bit is this idea of volume, right? The 78 people on the island right now, at one point there were 6,000, right? To sort of communicate that visually, this phone book, although this phone book was a little bit later and there's only like 1,500 or so names, it's sort of the beginning of me starting to piece together this idea of dealing with objects, ephemeral objects and historical pieces that I think invariably will find their way into the work at some point. And I needed to, when I first started the work, to sort of tried to figure out things as best I could and be comfortable with the space, just from a photographic standpoint, just from this is here, this is in front of me, I can make a picture of this thing, I can quantify this in some way. And now being 3 trips in and having a long period of time in between trips, beginning to do research and talk to people that have been there, you know, prior to me, were there during the military, were there just after the military, pulling out and trying to sort of weave together something a little bit larger, and again, something that's not necessarily a documentary, right? I'm not as interested in a documentary as I'm interested in something a little bit more lyrical. But discovering this phone book was the start of making just sort of twisting the work a little bit more and thinking about it in a little bit of a different way. It kind of starts to wear on you after a while, right? Sandy Cove, Bay Shore, Cullick, Public Works, naval facility where the people worked, where they lived. This picture obviously is not a picture that I took, but one I've been sort of infatuated with a little bit lately, right? And again, sort of the same reason with the names on the phone book of sort of the sheer, this obviously isn't 6,000 or 1,500 people, but sort of the sheer volume of these all men looking back, almost joyful, sort of hamming to the camera. This is at a theater. There's a lot of questions here, right? Questions that I can't answer in the pictures that I'm making, but I think that there might be, for pictures like this, a place to sort of point forward and point back, and I'm still sort of figuring that out to some degree, but. Quonset hut that probably was ammunition storage, I would imagine. Now it looks like it's been taken over by hunters to some degree, right? This is a few miles outside of town, south of town where the caribou are. Looks like where guys were coming in to warm up or maybe butcher an animal. Mike, I met Mike the first summer that I was there, the first trip that I was there in July. He was the son, or excuse me, the brother of Deb, the city clerk who I stay with. And I got there on a Thursday, and it was halibut season. He was the owner of one of the 3 boats, one of the 3 halibut boats that were in town. And he was there waiting for a part. He was grounded, right? He couldn't fish. He was waiting for a part to be on the next Alaska Airlines flight. So I got there on a Thursday. He was waiting for a part to come on the Sunday flight, and this would have been like Friday, right? So he's got a couple days still that he's waiting for a part to come from Seattle, from Anchorage, probably from Seattle then to Anchorage, to get his boat up and running so he can go out and, make a living, right? And I took this picture while he was waiting for the part, and he was, I won't say that he was at the end of his rope, but Mike had seen better days, right? He was a very generous guy, and it was kind of doesn't look like it here. It looks windy, but it was a really crappy day, and he gave me a generous amount of time to make a picture of him. He was a really nice guy. The part that came in on the flight wasn't the right part. So Mike was out now again until the next flight, which was then another 4 or 5 days later. I didn't see Mike the rest of that time. I don't know whether he was on the boat or whether he was in his place, and he was so generous with me. I didn't bother Mike again. But when I went back again in March, Mike had sold the boat and moved back to Washington. And Deb said, as far as she knew, he was doing construction again. But that bit broke him, right? Which isn't uncommon, obviously. A harsh place. Again, damn neighborhood again. Hailstorm when I was there in March. I mean, the weather moves so fast. Walking down this road, actually the sun was sort of out, and then coming behind me is sort of and I turned around, it was just this wall of hail came flying through. And again, sort of an example, if I had the big camera One, I probably wouldn't have been out there in that wind because the big camera would have been like a sail. But the wind's coming from behind me, and I was able to get a few frames off. And then it was gone, and 15 minutes later, the sun was out, and then another hour later, a storm comes through, a squall comes through. Pretty amazing. Brad at the bay, north of the island, the very northern tip of the island facing the Bering. Chris. Abandoned building after abandoned building. This is the barracks up on Bering Hill. This is, as far as I know, this building was mostly single soldier housing, where most of the housing down in town, down by the bay, was family housing. When the military left in '97, right, the buildings were left, but everything was left, right? Every chair, every desk, every mattress, everything. The galley. So this is up on Bering Hill. So just west of where all the pictures have been down in town is where officer housing is, and where everything, for the most part, everything that had to do with military operations, administration was all up on the hill, Bering Hill. This is the guard tower at a place they call the Seven Doors of Doom. A big concrete pad behind, and I don't have pictures of them here, I apologize, but there's these seven doors, and sort of this really wonderful typology. Each one is just a slightly different than the other one, and they're big concrete Kwanzas, essentially. ADAC was, during the Cold War, was a submarine detection site. There's some talk about some of those doors. There might have been some nuclear radioactive material there. We don't know that for sure, but it was military, or it was ammunition, military behind the gate. The same area. There's a building that's all sort of outfitting, right? Hazmat suits. This room was all obviously boots, just, you know, stacked. I mean, this is probably thigh high of just boxes and green rubber boots, military issue boots in this building that's almost falling over. When I was there this last time, so there was a trawler that sank just northwest of Adak here, maybe 6 months or so ago. The Coast Guard, I think, got everybody off the boat. Right, it was a trawler out of Washington State, and they got everybody off and got them to Adak. Coast Guard got them to Adak. And apparently they all got in their Mustang suits without shoes. So when they all got to Adak, they didn't have shoes. I remember hearing it on the radio and thinking, God, I wish I was out there, right? Like just laying in bed and not be able to sleep. Like, oh, I wish I was on Adak. This sounds amazing. All these, 40 guys descending onto town and not having any shoes. And then when I was there this last time in September, this same room, it didn't dawn on me for a second, but the same room, I walk in, and this level of shoes and boxes was significantly lower, and I'm like, what the heck is going on? Like, I couldn't quite put it together, and then it dawned on me that and I remember hearing the K2 ran the piece. I remember hearing that the community banded together and found these guys all shoes so they could have shoes and get off the island. I'm pretty certain that this is where those shoes came from, and I would love to see like 40 guys all wearing the same rubber shoes, but I'm sure somebody got that picture, but not me. This is a lighter, obviously, a gentleman named Paul. The Adak is a Superfund site, and they're still recovering unexploded ordnance from the island. There are different parcels on the island where there are unexploded bombs and different things on the north end. And contractors come in the summertime. Used to be 300 contractors came in right after '97, and now it's down to like maybe 20 come in, part of the economy of Adak. And this is a guy named Paul who I spoke to one afternoon, was one of the contractors that comes up in the summer to help with that effort. And he was very proud of this lighter. There's a White Alice station on the island as well, and I very much wanted to see that site. I wanted to see those towers, right, like the ones out in Nome, big, beautiful concrete radio towers, deflection towers. And I'd seen some pictures online, come to find out that those pictures were from like the 70s or 80s, and they had long pulled the towers down and buried them. And this is sort of all this big concrete foundations as well, but this is sort of what's left of those towers, and I sort of almost look like a grave site to me. Another one of the abandoned buildings. Fallout shelter. Nuclear fallout shelter. More housing. This is quite a way, not quite a way, it's 6 or so miles from Bering Hill and from downtown proper, out north of the island, out by where they're reclaiming some of the unexploded ordnance. One of the houses downtown in the winter. Jack's been on the island since the late 90s. Has some neurological problems, is in and out of the clinic there. That's like the wall of the clinic behind him. I met him just coming out of the clinic. Him, as well as a few other people on the island, a woman by the name of Mary. Her husband's name just escaped me for a second, but that couple and then Jack as well have been on the island for a long time and are up against the point where they sort of recognize that they might have to leave the island. There are no real emergency services, right? Guardian did come in from, I forget Mary's husband's name now, I'll think of it right when we leave, but Guardian came out and got him a couple months prior for a heart condition, and there's a sort of an aging population there, half a dozen people that are sort of right on the verge of probably having to abandon their life there to go somewhere where medical treatment's closer. Looking down from White Alice Hill. And this is the last picture from the 8X set. This is the boundary of, this is as far as you can drive to where they're taking care of the unexploded ordnance on the north of the island. So you take the road 8 or so miles north. This is Andrew Bay, Andrew Lagoon, and then Andrew Bay, and then right across that little spit there, that's the Bering Sea to the north, and really nothing until the North Pole. And then just beyond this line is where they're doing the unexploded ordnance recovery. You can't drive past there, but I didn't know sort of what this was going to look like. Again, sort of from a photographer standpoint, talking to the contractors, like, it's not really out. It's not out there. There's like a gate that you can't get across. It's right there in the water, and they're sort of not dissuading me from the standpoint of there being any sort of restrictions out there, but it's like, I drive all the way out. There's not much there, and it's sort of a beautiful day, and I rounded the corner, there's this flagpole with a skull and crossbones. I'm like, what do you mean there's nothing there, right? This, red skull and crossbones in a blue sky. Photographically, that's about, anyway, not much better than that. So ADAC, 3 trips. I'm going again, for sure over the 4th of July week. I'm trying to put in another trip between now and then. I just need to sort of logistically figure that out. Apparently the 4th of July, they do fireworks there on the beach, and some family members come in from out of town. It's sort of that week, there's sort of a larger population than there is much of the rest of the time. And I'm sort of loving the idea of red, white, and blue, and all of the things that go along with Stars and Stripes and the 4th of July and fireworks on this old abandoned military outpost in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. So I'll be going back again in July. I want to finish up with just one other thing that's sort of been a little bit more on my mind here lately. This picture I made in Fairbanks in like 07, right? As part of something else entirely, as part of a project that sort of didn't go anywhere. But this one picture, this is a church behind it in the satellite dish. It's like, 10 below 0 or something that night out there with the 4x5, the big camera out making these winter night pictures, a lot of sort of movement and sort of ice fog moving around. And this picture is out of all the pictures from that bit, a lot of really bad pictures and a couple good ones, but it just sort of never kind of hit a dead end, and I kind of didn't know what to do with it and sort of put it in a box. But this picture is one that I always kind of kept coming back to, and the reason I found it so fascinating is I couldn't quite put my thumb on why I was so compelled by this picture, right? Like why I kind of kept coming back to it and saying, there's something there that's just sort of unsettling to me and I can't quite figure out what it is. You know, it's black and white and it's very sort of formal and a lot of the things architecturally that I like in other pictures from different projects. And then when I moved to Juneau, my wife and I moved to Juneau in 2010, and sort of thinking about this place and thinking about this idea of isolation and sort of being off the road system and this idea of communication, and sort of leaving this place that we loved very much and being somewhere that was different, and that I couldn't just hop in the car like I could on the Hall Road and just go up and make pictures. Sort of this need to go out and do things. I felt like this sort of technology way of communicating was a little bit more sort of front and center in my life in Juneau than maybe it had been there, sort of subconsciously. So sort of investigating this picture again and sort of thinking about it and thinking about this idea of being isolated and being sort of cut off, and a lot of the ways that projects start for me, and a lot of projects that don't go anywhere, but at least start with this idea, right? This thing that I'm thinking about something and I don't know, I want to try to sort of crack the nut and try to sort of solve it visually, or at least, not maybe solve it, but at least sort of rectify it to some degree. And once I started sort of moving around Juneau and sort of thinking about this idea of these satellite dishes and this idea of communication and these sort of inert, almost, I mean, there's sort of ubiquitous things, but they almost seem antiquated, right? They almost seem like something of this past, but they're obviously useful. And I started going out at night in the winter, sometimes snow, sometimes not, but midnight, 1, 2 in the morning, with the big camera, 4 or 5 minute exposures, and a lot of the time all the time at houses, maybe businesses, maybe some places that were closed, but sort of thinking about what was being transmitted, right? This sort of communication, this sort of idea of neighbors to some degree. Thinking about other photographers, being really almost blatant about other photographers that have sort of worked in a similar, what we call a typology, right? A typology is dealing with one sort of object or picture or style and repeating, and this idea that this single thing can sort of garner more weight in the volume, right? That it can be something larger than what it was singly, and trying to kind of work out what these things sort of meant, or if they meant anything, and just this idea photographically in a black and white sense of these always white or light gray objects across, against a black background. And it's something that I thought about for probably 2 years, like I should do that one of these days, kind of like ADAC, I should do that, and then like, just make some more pictures and sort of see where it takes you. And I'm not entirely sure even yet exactly what it all is, but I've taken some comfort in these over the years. And I have to say, sort of from a current event standpoint, a lot of talk these days about news, fake or otherwise, and sort of how we get information, how we deal with information. They're sort of maybe taking a little different form, to me anyway, maybe not to anybody else, but to me. What's the last one? So just in closing, so as Mary Lou said, right, Saturday is the last day for the Alaska Positive Show, right? Our biennial photography exhibition that starts here. It's going to go to Sitka. It'll go up to Wasilla, make its way around the state. That show for me, since I've been in Alaska now 11 or so years, right, is whether I've had pieces in, whether I've submitted anything, regardless, it always has been this thing that's sort of this pulse of what's going on in photography in the state during that time, right? Who's where and who's doing what, right? Like who's taking on different parts of the state, right? This place is massive, right? There's so many stories, right? So many stories that will not be told. Some really wonderful stories that are being told. And I think a lot about sort of what to do next, right? Like, what's the next thing? What's the next thing, right? Do this another, 20, 30 years, right? What does it all add up to? What does it look like? What does it mean? And I think, on the verge of sort of, I don't want to go this route, but I'll sort of go this route, right? We're here, in Alaska, right, in a time of really uncertain fiscal times, right? Tomorrow we're entering into pretty uncertain national, international times, right? And I was just reading yesterday a very good friend of mine, an author, who had an interview in a magazine, and he's been writing for 50 years, 45, 50 years, and he talks a lot about community, right? Talks a lot about sort of taking comfort in other people that are sort of trying to do similar things or sort of engaged in similar conversations or similar ideas or similar struggles or whatever it is. And he let be known in the interview that he has pretty aggressive cancer, right? So mortality's on his mind a lot right now, and thinking a lot about sort of what does it all mean? Have I done enough? And blah blah blah. These kind of things that, not blah blah blah, but things that are sort of at our core, right? And one of the things that he said that sort of stuck with me that I want to sort of end with tonight was that the interviewer asked him sort of what he thinks the role of writing is, what the role of art is. And his answer was that the sort of the soul search he's done, that he believes that the role of the artist, of the writer, of the museums, right, or the collectors, the arbiters of the work, or the makers of the work, is to illuminate and provoke, was his answer, right? And I love the idea of illuminating, right, from a photography standpoint, this idea that photography is the record of light reflecting off a surface, right, illuminate, right, to show, to give witness, to bear witness. This word provoke is the tricky bit, right? I mean, the provoke can be to provoke questions, right? Provoke can be to ask something of the viewer. It can be to poke a stick, it can be to agitate, it can be to make uncomfortable, right? And where I want to sort of end tonight is I think that his want of illuminating and provoking is sort of something that I'm sort of putting in my chest pocket and sort of taking with me. And I sort of wanted to share that tonight because I think that if you're an artist, if you're a writer, if you're someone that's directing such things, I think in this day and age it's a really good place to start. So I want to end with that. Thank you very much, guys. I appreciate it.